It's the latest thing.
And I loved radio and adored radio, but television was even better because it was the adult show and tell. You could just do anything, but television loved it.
I think the issue of the future for both women and men in communications is the ethical and judicious use of technology and how we communicate.
Where do we start? There are so many ways that it has changed. Technology is obviously one of the most dramatic and significant ways it's affected all of our individual lives so tremendously over the last couple of decades, and it's absolutely changed the course of our profession, because the lag time that Jean talked about between when you would receive information, when you would piece it together into a story, and then when a reader or a listener would actually receive it, there was a time period there that today is collapsed into nothing. It's instant. The digital age has improved our lives in so many ways, and yet, as we know, it makes people believe that anyone is a writer, anyone is a graphic designer, anyone is a photographer, because everyone has access to a keyboard and a camera. And we all know that that's not true. It requires more skills than the ability to type to be a writer.
I have a real issue with those in our profession who are not ethical in what they're disseminating. And then I have a larger issue with the gullibles out there who will believe anything that supports their notion. There's just room for us to set an ethical standard. There's room in the business community for ethics, and yet many of us are MARCOM, which means, or PR in some way. We're working for those businesses. And look at who was the whistleblower in Enron. It was one of us.
It seems like communication has a good side and a bad side. I think many of us who have worked on projects and communicated information and issues that helped make the world better, and we've raised something up into the public spotlight that needed to be raised up. And then I think there are times in our industry where things that don't need to be talked about have been raised to that level where we don't even wish to hear about it or talk about it anymore. It's a very complex industry that we work in, and we have such a responsibility to really think about what we're doing because it's powerful.
I don't know, I was in China during the anniversary of Tiananmen Square. Chinese television would not show any kind of anniversary stuff on it. CNN was making a big deal out of it, saying they're not allowed to talk about it, you'll see nothing on television. So at that point I thought, I'm thankful to be in a country where we can speak about things, even if we disagree with our politics here, that we can speak about it. And as communicators, it's our job to be very thorough and accurate. And I feel a great responsibility for that.
I wonder if the media is serving it well. Media's changed a lot, and I can remember when television came into being, pad and pencil press served maybe public information better than the 30-second sound bites that television offers. They can't tell enough, and it's rare that you get a really in-depth understanding as you might from a great writer.
I want to speak a little bit to that because we hear the word spin, the spin so much. I think that really is lowering communication, and I see the same person occasionally, spinning on this side and then getting a higher salary and spinning on that side. I'm not for that. I think your spin ought to be on the side that your heart is.
There's too much ass kissing. I hate to use those words, but there are a lot of editors who want to be in cahoots with the power, the president in Washington, and so they take a long time before they look at it or let their staffs look at what's happening to the country. And we've just been through a really bad 3 years of losing ground. America's lost ground. We are looked on with hatred and disdain, and I don't know how we're going to recapture it, but to see it happen without really the main voices, the media, pointing it out, they're supposed to be ahead of everybody and not just trying to hold on to their news sources.
The people who hold the gates to information are the gatekeepers of power in the future, and those are communicators, those who understand it, know how to use it, and the whole issue of do they use it ethically, and do they care about fairness and treatment of all people in the way they communicate, I think is the issue for the future.
You know, when I can lie in my bed and with my remote move from the picture of Saddam Hussein in the court to seeing the rings around Saturn, I just had to phone 3 or 4 people to say, you've got to realize that. But to think I can move from 900 million miles into outer space from a court in Iraq, it's just the technology of it. And when we can get our intelligence and our perception to catch up with that kind of high-tech progress, then, you know, we will have conquered peace and how to keep the conversation going.
Well, I think just like most professional organizations, the value is in the people you meet.
I knew it originally as Theta Sig, then Women in Communications, we were instructed not to say Wiki, but of course we did because it sounded like a coven, and I liked that. It seemed appropriate somehow.
That really stand out in my mind about women in communications as a whole, and you hear it over and over again, is when you first join, and especially if they throw something in your lap and say go do it, you're intimidated because you're surrounded by these fabulous, very articulate, intelligent women, and you're scared and you think, how could I possibly live up to this? But on the other hand, they are there to support you, and they're probably the most appreciative group. Anytime I ever did anything, I was always astounded by how helpful and appreciative and supportive they all were, and that seems like that tradition continues on both within the organization and on things that go on with the same women in the workplace.
I think we've learned from the ones before, so we kind of hopefully pass it down
so.
in
It's
the same
very,
kind of spirit.
Very maternal and supportive, and in a mentoring sort of a way.
Mm-hmm.
One of the most wonderful things that Women in Communication has done for me is about 17 or 18 years ago, a group of us who at that time were still in our 20s, who were officers, many of us past presidents of the group, got together and formed a breakfast club. We have been a wonderful support group for one another and have continued to be friends through thick and thin.
The very first meeting that I went to was back in 1989, and the speaker was Betty Sue Flowers, and my jaw was on the floor almost the entire time as I listened to her. I forget what the topic was, but I remember being incredibly impressed and wanting to be a part of the group after that.
But I think about those friendships and the women that you get to meet, you get to be mentors of, and then you get to be mentees, has got to be the real benefit of this organization. And no matter what was happening organizationally, there was always that network of people that you need to know and want to know and will treasure friendships all your life.
And I feel the same way. I've been in since high school, you know, back in the Stone Age. And I've never seen any ugliness in this organization, not any.
I think that networking, because we all felt a camaraderie, newswomen, we'd struggled to get there. And we were helping each other before networking really became a word out of the women's movement of 1971. But we are helpful to each other. We know how to spot a job and to help somebody we know that's worthy, hopefully, to move on in their business.
I'm constantly mistaken for Liz Carpenter. We're both white hair. That's the only, I wish I were Liz Carpenter, but I ain't.
The early days of Theta Sigma Phi, which was always a strong chapter at UT, and we had a strong journalism school. Wonderful people.
Pam, tell us about your picture.
Okay. Well, you may not have known it, but here with us in spirit during this conversation is Joe Caldwell-Meyer and Gladys Hurst. And Gladys was one of our founders of this chapter. Joe is the reason that we had the national headquarters here for so many years. She was what was called then the executive secretary. Joe is a wonderful woman who was the daughter of a newspaper editor in Waxahachie. And she grew up quite the Southern Belle, quite the steel magnolia. People that she mentored was Bill Moyers, who, until Joe died, would stay at her home when he was in town. Gladys was sort of the Johnny Appleseed of women in communications. She would move around and start a chapter, and she finally came home to her original chapter. Gladys was a hoot and strong as a rock. She kept things going on a national level. During the Depression, she served 2 terms as national president. She was the first officer in the Navy from the university. Just happened to be female.
These were people who, in terms of the profession and the organization, had blazed the trails that we were all benefiting from. Like Amy said, today we benefit from so much work that Pam did. And Pam and those of us who are older benefited from the work that Jean and Joe and Gladys and so many others did. And these were such intellectually lively and entertaining people that you could just learn from. And it's wonderful to see kind of this chain of custody come through this organization where we spring from people like Gladys and Joe and Jean, and the work that Pam did, the work that Amy and Lisa have been doing with the national organization in these last months. The spirit is the same. This crosses 75 years, and yet the spirit lives on, even though the times and the circumstances are different. And it's wonderful. I hope in 75 years people will be talking about what Amy and Lisa did to reinvigorate the national organization, that there will be a series of people of different ages who will have heard stories and carried tales and passed those along, because there's kind of an oral tradition here that we're able to share that goes beyond the written word, and it lives on. I think that's a very hopeful sign about what this organization can continue to do.
So this is the time for women to reinterpret our civilization. This is the moment, and we are the women. So let us rekindle the torch which Theta Sigma Phi has lighted in us and go forward, heart first.